All right, now that we've sort of talked about motivation in some kind of above way, now let's kind of get down and dirty, and let's talk about how can a company use their understanding of the principles of motivation to change the organization. Okay, so we're talking about organizational behavioral management. So OBM, right? You're going to improve motivation and ultimately performance using reinforcement theory. You're going to reward desired behaviors. And so the idea HR management looks at is this. It's a 5 steps to the behavioral management of human resources. Now, I want you to, perhaps you're familiar with applied behavior analysis as would be used in an educational or clinical setting. And you'll find that these 5 steps here for OBM are awfully similar to the steps for applied behavior analysis, ABA. Very similar. Except that ABA, the goal is to modify the behavior of one individual. The goal of OBM is to modify the behavior of a company of people. Okay? So, in order to do organizational behavioral management, you're going to target specific behaviors that must be changed. Specific things like tardiness. Okay? Pick a very specific, measurable things. Right? Once you have picked a target behavior that you would like to change, would like to modify, you will measure the targeted behavior and establish a baseline. At this time, there is an average of 37% tardy among our employees. Okay, you have a standard which you will then use as a comparison. You're going to look at contingencies. You're going to then find out why is it that employees are late. Because if learning theory has taught us nothing, behavior is controlled by its consequences. And if you have a behavior and you want to understand why does that behavior happen, look at the consequences of that behavior and you'll find it. Okay? So you're going to examine these contingencies and check out the relationships. Then you're going to create an intervention to change, to modify the targeted behaviors and create a reinforcement structure to the attainment of goals. Okay, so I'm going to target the tardiness, and perhaps what I'll be doing is creating a system where anybody that gets to work before 9 a.m. gets a free donut when they walk in the door. I don't know. Maybe HR will come up with something better than that, but you get the idea. We'll get a free donuts. Okay, and then finally, the last 5th step is to evaluate the success of the intervention by comparing your current state of tardiness with your initial state of tardiness. Okay? So, the things that can really influence the organizational behavioral management could be and by the way, you pretty much could take much of what I'm going to say here and go to a learning class and look at it. It would say, what is it that influences the effectiveness of a reinforcer? Okay, so go to the operant conditioning chapter of your learning class, and you'll find an awful similar thing. That in order for a reinforcer or punisher to be effective, it must be immediate. It must come as soon as the behavior occurs. Okay, and so if you give a donut the moment they walk in the door before 9 o'clock, that's about as immediate as you're going to get. Okay, whereas if you have an incentive structure, employees that are not tardy for 1 month in a row will get this reward. Okay, it's going to be less effective. All right. So the contingency, that is to say, the employees must know as a statement of fact, the reason you got the donut is because you came to the organization before 9 a.m. Make it 100% abundantly clear. This step is sometimes difficult when it comes to animals, right? Because you can't verbalize things with animals. So it's pretty, kind of the type of incentive used. And you have to be careful because we've said it before, different people are motivated by different things, all right? And so perhaps you might even need to make an incentive system that is different for each employee. For one employee, it might be donuts that motivates them. For another, it might be Snickers bars. What do I know? So maybe you're going to have pick one from this tray, okay? So what's going to happen is if you want to know what's going to incentivize an employee, you ask them. It's pretty straightforward. What is it that you desire, okay? It has to be under $1. What is it that you want, okay? So, very good. As we said, in a lot of cases, financial incentives work very well. So it's not the best, though, because, the amount of money available varies from year to year, and it's outside the employee's control. And so an employee says, why will I be motivated to work hard for an incentive which may or may not be available or of any substantial size? Okay. Some employees are really motivated by recognition, and that can be something as simple as Employee of the Month, right? Or, I got this one a couple of years ago, the Board of Trustees Teaching Award. But that came with a $500 check. Ooh, yeah, that was incentivizing. Okay. Faculty members get rewarded with titles, associate, full professor, okay? Outback and Chi-Chi's will give employees a month of a personal parking space. Ooh, I got one of those too. Don't tell people at Outback and Chi-Chi's. Okay. Here's an interesting structure that was used in Phoenix, Arizona. They were digitizing old court documents, and it was relatively expensive. In fact, they had a negative correlation between salary and productivity. What that implies is the more money people were making, the less productive they were. So they better fix this one, all right? If you got a negative correlation on that kind of you are wasting money and you're probably pissing off your best workers, okay? So probably got to change that. So what they did was they gave everybody a base salary of $7.20, okay? Then what they did was they set a minimum performance, all right? The minimum performance was, I don't know what it is, but we'll call it 100%, okay? And so then what they would do is they would base their pay on two different things. Number one, how productive are you compared to, 100, as I said, was a baseline minimum standard. You're 110%, 120, 200%, meaning you're doing double what is the minimum. And then they also included in there quality, all right? That is because they were transcribing documents, and so these documents had the potential for errors. And so the best, the idea is your salary will increase as a function of both productivity and quality. All right, so it's a cool system. I like that one. Other potential motivators is whether you want the incentives to be based on individuals or group incentives. And so depending on what's going on, I sometimes use this as well. Sometimes I give extra credit. If you participate in a research study, you get your own incentivized points. If the entire class completes X percent, it's in the syllabus, read your syllabus. If X percent, I think it was 90, but don't quote me on it, look at the syllabus. If 90% or more of the class complete the end of course survey, then everyone gets. So we can use both individual and group incentives, okay? Individual incentives tend to eliminate social loafing, because even though I always set that 90% mark, there's always going to be a couple of people that just don't complete it. I don't know why they don't. I know why they don't, because they don't want to, and they figure everybody else is going to do it, and I'm going to get the extra credit anyway. Okay? But some group incentives that have become more popular recently are profit sharing. So a company may set and say, we need 6% profit. Anything more than 6% will split among the employees. Okay? Or gain sharing. That is, this year we produced this number of products. If we can improve over last year's performance, then everybody gets some reward. clearly, and again, this is, I mean, go ask B.F. Skinner. He's itching in his grave right now to come and talk to you about this stuff, all right? And so we find that positive incentives, that is to say, rewarding people for being on time, is much more effective than punishing people that are tardy, okay? So that's just kind of how that generally works. And again, that we're talking animals, humans, it's just, that's how it works, okay? We find that when people are rewarded, they tend to display their good behavior. When people are punished, they go out of their way to hide their bad behavior, right? Make sure nobody sees it. And then finally, the last one that would really influence the outcome of an organizational behavioral management system is how fair is the reward system, all right? Am I getting the incentives in a rate which is equitable? So go back to equity theory and remind yourself what that means, okay?